I wiped all the pictures. I swore I would never go digital. There was a period when I would liken a photographer to a samurai. You have to understand what you saw. You have to understand what attracted your attention.
Anyone can pick up a camera and take photos, but can you make real images?
You have a standard, and sometimes those standards are realistic, sometimes they're your demons.
How do you see photography evolving or devolving?
AI is probably one of the most destructive things that's happened in terms of artistic creativity. We're just like pumping out the stuff.
How has Buddhism helped you be better?
You know, nothing really lasts or changes. We'll always be interconnected, and that's important.
How do you see us moving forward in terms of the spirit of photography?
Our world is over.
Why? I love Rio's presence. So calm, collected. Yeah.
Not famous for it.
We're going to get into that.
Not famous for being calm.
I've obviously done a little bit of as much research as I can do on someone online, right? So I'm keen to explore a little bit about you initially as a person, and then as an artist, as a writer, as a photographer, as a teacher. And in order to do that, I wanted to touch first upon your photography, because this is Photography First podcast. We'll get into the other art forms. But when I look at your photography, and followed you for a while, didn't really have the guts to reach out, but I think we have a mutual friend in Michael. He put me in touch. And I wanted to kind of try and draw a line underneath your photography in terms of the humanity and the documentary style that you portray in your images, specifically storytelling. So on that note, I wanted to ask you how photography links us as people and how it means to the discovery of self and the awareness of one another.
Well, if we have 3 or 4 days, we could do that.
We have as long as you have.
Well, I mean, you know, when I teach, when I do the master classes, usually the first day we hardly even shoot. You know, I mean, I want people to sort of think about what they are, what they're doing, and actually, I struck on this the first time I discovered this. It was just by chance. I think it was early 80s. The Dwi University in Denpasar just opened communications faculty. And they really didn't have any idea what they were doing, which was to my advantage. But the dean, who I knew, came to see me and he said, "You got to do this. You know, you got to be a lecturer." And I said, "Look, I didn't even go to university. I dropped out. You know, I didn't learn photography formally. I don't even know how to put a curriculum together." And he says, "I don't care." He says, "I want somebody who's actually got experience, who's worked as a photographer, and so forth." So I said, "Okay, you know, this is your dime, right?" So it wasn't a lot of dimes, but it was okay. It was a nice gig for me. And so I walked in, the first day I walked in, and there were all these students, you know, and typical Indonesian students. I guess maybe they're not like that anymore in the West, but they're all sitting there. They all had their notebooks out and their pencils. And it was like, you know, ready, set, go, you know, and I said, just, you know, put those pencils away. And they're like, "Oh, okay." And I said, "Now I want everybody to close your eyes. Just close your eyes." This is a really interesting exercise. Close your eyes. I don't know how I got it, but I just had this idea. Close your eyes, and I want you to imagine your world without photographs anywhere. No photographs of your parents, no photographs of your brothers and sisters, no photographs of, you know, President Biden. It just, when you think about it, we are so impacted by photographic imagery. You know, our world compared to 200 years ago is such a totally different world as a human being interacting with community, interacting with other human beings. And we didn't really know how to interact with people from other cultures and other countries and so forth. We still don't, but, you know, it's less of an impact. And I want you to sit there and just think about it. You know, there's no advertisement. There might be newspapers, but it's print, and it's just text, you know, and they were like, "Okay, it's getting weird." Okay, just keep thinking about it. And after about 10 minutes, I said, okay, now reverse it and think about where all those images are and how your quote unquote image or how your understanding of the world is so locked into all these images which have been impacting you your whole life long. Advertisements, media, TikTok, and all that stuff. And it's bombarding you. So the question is, okay, you understand that. Now you have a little glimpse of that. What about what you're doing? What are you contributing to this? Are you going to just do more garbage? Or are you going to think about what you're doing? And so that's how I started the course. They liked it. And I had 20 students, and we went through this whole thing, and we did pinhole long before anybody in Bali knew about pinhole, and it was mad stuff, and we were just goofing around doing all this stuff. And we did some history and talked about what the impact was of people like, Daguerre and people like, Nietzsche and people like, Cartier-Bresson and all these people. And so they got a sense of the history. And, if you want to write these names down, write them down, whatever, I don't care. So they had a kind of unorthodox introduction or an academic introduction. I didn't really want to do I wanted them to understand what photography is about. And this is in answer to your question as well. What do I, that's how I feel about photography. I think photography is a very powerful, visual sense is one of the most powerful senses we have. And so at the end of that semester, we had the exams. And I walked in the room and there were 60 students. And I'm like looking at myself, who the fuck are you? Because this is before Indonesia imposed a minimum amount of, lectures that you had to attend.
Okay.
I think now it's like 80 or 90%. But before there was
just voluntary.
You came if you came, I'm looking at it, I was like, why are you sitting next to the people who came to all my lectures? And they're like, well, you can cheat if you want, but there are no questions. It's all essay. And they're just looking at me like
love it.
I'm gonna die. So I flunked. That was my first exam that I gave, and I flunked 2/3 of the class.
Wow. Why?
And I actually, some of the essays were okay. Some of them I didn't care. It was just the fact that they had attended the lectures. They had actually, put something down. They had, put something together. Mind was working. And the others, they were just so I had a string of these 40 students coming to my house, for the next 2 weeks. Like one brought a crate of Coca-Cola, and I said, I don't drink Coca-Cola. And another brought a carton of cigarettes, and I said, well,
Bribes.
It's like, I can give you a chance to do the test again if you want, but I don't think you're going to pass. So the next semester, somebody ripped off one of my rain jackets off my bike.
Really?
Yeah, it might have been one of them, but I don't know. So it's photography for me has, I'm just going to ramble, okay? Photography for me has it's always had a pretty deep impact, and I really believe as a documentary photographer, especially, I think your experiences as a child and in your youth have a huge impact on what you do later. Or they're related. I tell you a very interesting, strange story, but in '65, my father, who was in the government, my father was in diplomatic service. Anyway, we were back in Jakarta at that time, and there was something stirring, and he decided that he should send us all back to Europe because he had been posted in Switzerland, and I was born in Switzerland. My godfather was a German who lived in Switzerland, fellow ambassador. So my godfather said, just send them over and I'll look after them, figure it out. And we'll get to them the boarding schools and all stuff. He was Catholic and we all ended up in Catholic boarding schools. Anyway, how weird is it? But we arrived there in '65, and then 2 months later, all the stuff that happened in '65, the counter coup against the so-called communist coup, and so we had no news for about 5 months of my parents So I was like 11, and it was like, oh, now we're orphans, you know? It was weird. And at Christmas, we went to stay with my godfather, and he had two daughters and a son. The son wasn't there, but the two daughters, one was a zoologist and one was a photographer. So Brigitte takes one day, she took pity on me. It's like, come on, come to this doctor with me. I'm like, yeah, okay. Yeah, 11 years old. That's weird. Okay, red lights, whatever. And she said, okay, you just stand there and see this tray, okay? When I tell you, you shake it, okay? So she exposes this sheet of paper. I'm like, okay, that's cool. It's whatever it is. Slips it into the tray, and I start swirling it, right? Back, forward, backs and forth. Looks like it starts coming out. And it's like, well, this is cool. There's like magic coming out. And there it was. There was this black and white image of these people. And I said, who are these people? They look like American Indians. And she says, oh no, they're Tibetans. And I'm like, what are Tibetans? This is like 1965, right? What are Tibetans? And it was only later I found out that Switzerland was the first place to take Tibetan refugees, first place in Europe to take Tibetan refugees.
Really?
Yeah. So I got really fascinated by photography. I didn't get into it seriously yet, but I was fascinated by it. So years later, I started getting into it in a more serious way, and stuff came back. And then a few years later, I connected with the Tibetan Buddhist, So, His Holiness the Dalai Lama is my teacher. And when I was doing webcast, I do webcast translating now. I translate for him live. So there's this whole history of like 40 years of this, interaction that started actually in 1965. And these things, they stay with you, and you reconnect with these things. And also Indonesia, after about 6 years in Europe, which I was very excited by. I'm going to be honest, when I left, I thought, oh, cool, I'm going to Europe, this is going to be, going to get blue jeans and Coca-Cola, like, I go in Jakarta, 1960s, it was really, and after 6 years there, and I graduated from high school, suddenly it was over. It's like, I don't want to be here anymore. This place is, for me, there was no connection anymore. It was like, it was dead. And I left and I came back here to Indonesia. And I had one place I wanted to go to, which I had childhood memories of, which was Bali. Because I'd come here in 1963 with my dad. And just stayed with me. It was so magical. It was an amazing place, And my dad was into doing Super 8 film. Super 8 film, and he had a couple of cameras, and so my childhood experience was looking at all his photographs because he left Indonesia first in the 30s to go to study, because there was a whole movement of Indonesians, young Indonesians who went over to the Middle East to study at Al-Azhar or different places. They ended up in Lebanon. And long story short, he ended up doing his PhD in Istanbul, which is where he met my mother. So he had all these pictures, all his travels. He somehow he'd gotten into photography when he went to the Middle East. But they were cool. You looked at these pictures and they were just so evocative. And I really realized how evocative photography can be, and how you can touch people. It's like, I call it the magic window. You take people through the window. And you don't even have to really work too hard to create stuff. Sometimes the stuff around you is just there. So, when you ask me, that's a very long answer to your question. But
love it. Keep talking, please. I love hearing your story. There's a wonderfully diverse and culturally rich history and story that you have, certainly moving into photography, but also your adult years as well.
Well, I just came back last week from my father's village in Lampung, and that was it really touched me in a big way. But I sat there and I looked at it and I thought, here's this guy, 1930s, the son of the head of the clan, but my grandfather's really nice guy, but he was tough. Everybody worked, Everybody worked the fields. Everybody, they would fill up the ox carts with all the produce. Take it 3 days to Tanjung Karang from where we were, like sitting on an ox cart for 3 days with the stuff, hard work, And you imagine this guy then, insisting on going to school. And my grandfather had a lot of vision. He said, yeah, okay, I'll pay for your school. You go to Jakarta, because you couldn't go to high school in Lampung. And he went there. And then he said, I'll help you a little bit, but you got to work your own way. And so he went then across to Cairo and then up. And so he, that was his philosophy, like you had to do your own stuff. And so he ended up, when he married my mother, who was Turkish, they came back during the revolution because the first vice president, this is an old thing in Indonesia between the Javanese and the Sumatrans, because the Javanese is such a huge part of the population. But Hatta was from West Sumatra, and my father was from Sumatra, and my father had his PhD in economics, and Hatta wanted somebody to work with. Anyways, I don't know if that's the only reason. I don't want to, because Hatta was a wonderful man. He was really one of the most honest people in the world, and unbelievable guy. But he worked with my dad. He got my dad to come. So he brought my dad back down in. And they flew the blockade, the Dutch blockade, with this American pilot, Bob Allen. You can Google him if you want. They flew the blockade, landed in West Sumatra. My uncle was there, he was already in the army. And then they made their way down to the village. So I'm just culturally diverse, okay? So they arrive in the village, and Waikunang Haji Kagungan was it was like, there was a road, but not much,
Yes.
there was a road. And so my dad rocks up with my mom, and she's this white woman. And
Turkish?
She was Turkish.
Turkish.
Yeah. Every single woman in that village, except for my grandmother and my dad's sister, hated her because she had made off with the most eligible man in the village. And it was like, she's like, who is this person? She can't even speak, So, yeah, it was a pretty wild story. And so then so I'm just telling you the story as the background of my, my background is sort of kind of mixed. And then they went to Jogja to be with the first government set up. It was the first capital of Indonesia. So my older sister was born under house arrest, actually. The Dutch, So somehow my father, he always drummed into me, Indonesia, it's your country, He never said right or wrong. He hated the wrong stuff, but he just said it's your country, So I always had that thing, I'm not super nationalistic, but it's my home. And I do have a strong feeling for it, more than I would for anywhere else. And so my photography, although I photographed in other places, obviously, and stuff, but I am really interested in showing, to see Bali, because I think that a lot of people come here, even people who've been here for maybe 10 years or 5 years, they really have no idea. They don't touch it. They don't touch the ground, And once you speak a language, you enter at a completely different level. And if you speak a local language, then you get into a totally different space. And I keep reminding my wife that, but anyway, it's just
Where's your wife from?
She's Ukrainian.
Okay.
Yeah, well, we just mix it all up.
Yeah. Well, you speak 5 languages, is that correct? How many languages do you speak?
Fluently, maybe only 4.
Only 4.
Yeah. Well, fluently English, Indonesian, Balinese, French, German so-so, Tibetan very little. Because I translate from English, not from Tibet.
Has the ability to speak fluent languages, I mean, I think I know the answer to the question, but I'm going to ask you to elaborate on it. Has that allowed you to become a better photographer? And if so, why?
I've never really looked at it that way. I think it certainly allows you to connect with people. But then I've been in places where, but the thing about languages is that every language has its own psychology, as you know. So when you speak a language reasonably well, you understand a little bit more about the psychology of the people you're speaking to. And that's helpful. For example, just look at syntax, for example. You know, German syntax, English syntax, Indonesian syntax, grammar. It's all very different. Then you have, I don't speak Japanese, but, Japanese syntax is similar to Tibetan. I mean, like in Tibetan, you'll have a sentence, da 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 da, and the verb will come. You don't actually know what's happening until the end. Not Delhi Dagidu. I'm going to go to Delhi. Dagidu is the verb. I'm going to. So it tells you something about how people think, and maybe that's helpful with photography. I don't know. Maybe it would make sense.
Yeah, it would make sense. It'd be interesting to explore that, certainly from someone who's done photography in places. I mean, when I go and do photography nearly all the time, unless I'm in an English speaking country, which generally I'm not from doing photography, then I have that barrier. And I try, with learning Indonesian as much as we can. But I believe that would make me a much better photographer, or at least, should I say, make the process a little bit more easy. To be able to connect with people. Certainly as a portrait artist or a documentary photographer, people in the frame nearly all the time. Having to connect with other humans, I feel that is an important skill that maybe gets overlooked sometimes, certainly as artists, because that's all we're doing with art anyway, is connecting with other people, whether they're in front of us as subjects or whether they are behind another screen or behind another door looking at images some other way or reading a book or something. We're trying to connect, aren't we? That's all we're trying to do. We're trying to express and connect. And language must be another way that we can enhance that connectivity. But I could be
Well, imagery is kind of like language too, because it has some, all imagery. I mean, you talk about semiotics, and semiotics are not the same for different cultures. People have different reactions to certain symbols. But I mean, if you could imagine a scenario, where are you from?
England.
Where?
Southampton.
Okay, so you're in Southampton. Say it's like 1980.
I'm not.
Well, and so suddenly a bunch of Japanese say turn up, who don't speak any English. Oh, take a picture. Oh, and you're like, what? This is weird. Why? Like, this is strange. That's the context.
Yeah.
But if the person speaks a little bit of English, tries to talk to you, it's possible you might appreciate that.
Yeah. And doesn't get put the camera in your face straight away, right? Spend some time
Hopefully,
to try and
yeah. Well, I mean, there's language that isn't spoken too. There's a whole kind of language, but in any case, language, I think, obviously, I mean, it's what we communicate with, but it's also when you speak a language, how you speak a language also. Yeah, because like Indonesian, Jakarta, East Java, West Java, Bali, it's all different. Like, I hope I'm not going to get strung up for this, but Bali probably has some of the worst grammar in Indonesian.
Really?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's just, they speak Indonesian like they're speaking Balinese.
Okay.
Not all. I mean, that's unfair. In Denpasar, obviously, they're much more, but you go into villages. Jakarta, people, slang is so, it's so fast moving. I can't even keep up with, and people from Jakarta, they talk to people who are in the villages. If they use slang, nobody will understand. Generational, so there's all that stuff.
Yeah.
But so there has to come a point, I think, where the language that you're speaking, it's not just words. It's body language. It's how strongly your intentions are conveyed. So you need to have some sort of honesty.
Speaking of language, what about the language with yourself? I see the way you carry yourself and through photography, and I haven't been on any of your courses or your masterclasses, but I've seen clips and read bits about you in talking about self-awareness, knowing yourself and your own personality, your own characteristics, your own purpose before you even think about photography. Can you explain that a little bit more and why it's important?
There was a period, probably a much more aggressive period in my life, when I would liken a photographer to a samurai. You know, you don't pull your katana out just wave it around. You pull it out when you need it, and you get it done. You put it away, because you're operating from a center. You know, it's not the camera that takes the picture. It's you.
The person. Yeah.
Yeah. It's quite obvious. And you can see that with people using, pinhole. You can see it with people, plastic. I mean, John Steinmeier, he did this book with a plastic camera. It's about vision, and that vision comes from where? And what is your particular vision? I mean, even if you look at, what's his name? The British guy. There goes the memory. The British photo documentarian. What's his name? He does very, very straight out, seemingly. Oh God, what is his name? I can't believe it. I always quote him and show him on my. But even if you're doing this very kind of supposedly straight style, whatever is there, photography, documentary, you're still, it's still, you're photographing what you're interested in.
Mm-hmm.
You're still choosing.
Mm-hmm. Still editing.
Yeah, editing is part of, choosing is part of editing is part of it. So yeah. So it is necessary sometimes to think about, why am I doing this? What is it for? And you're very keen to ask about the communication aspect of photography. You're very keen to know about, how this is exactly what, this is why we have to, think a little bit, take stock, because people come in and they say, oh, I learn photography. And I see these guys doing these tours. I will not mention names because that's a no-no.
I know.
But, and they do these tours, and I actually did a masterclass with, I gotta be careful, give it away, but somebody who had done one of these tours, right? And I generally asked to see a portfolio before. And I thought the portfolio were quite decent travel photography portfolios. They were good. Then came the time when we all met and we sat down, and I said, okay, well, what subject do you want to do? So this person, I asked people, what do you want to photograph? Because I don't, I can assign you something that's possible too, but I'd like to know if you have something you want to photograph, because I want to see your passion come out and play, because people work harder when they, into something. And so I don't really know. Well, okay, I want to do this subject. I said, okay, So we discussed it, and I said, like with documentary photography, anybody who does documentary photography knows that 50% of the battle is access. How do you get in there? This relates to your question about language. How do you get in there? How do you set it up? How do you open the doors? How do you allow yourself to immerse in there? How do you not impose? All that stuff. So she went off, and she obviously, she had set up contacts and all that kind of stuff. She was smart, but she was lost. She came back the first day it was execrable. It just wasn't happening. It just wasn't happening, And I said, I'm looking at your portfolio here. And I knew exactly what happened, Get the dancer there. Okay, come here, put that lens on. Okay, now take that picture. You don't really learn that way. So
you looked at the photos.
So that was, and it happens. It does happen, not all the time, but it does happen, somewhat frequently.
Why is that? Do people want, in my experience, a lot of beginner photographers who, and I remember being a beginner, right? And we all do. You kind of want to get from 0 to 1 in the quickest time possible. It's the learning process that's arduous, that's frustrating. You're making mistakes. It's just, I can't do this. What am I missing? And people want that quick fix because in most other facets of their life, they can get that quick fix. I want to watch a movie, turn Netflix on. I want a meal, order Gojek or Uber Eats, or I want a taxi, order Uber. I want this. Well, we live in that kind of life of abundance. With photography, you can pick up, anyone can pick up a camera and take photos, but can you make real images?
Photos.
Phones, yeah. I mean, you, I have nothing against phones. It's another,
Well, I
it's
use
just a different sensor, right?
Yeah.
That's all we're talking about. But the intent behind that is everything. That how you, that mindful photography process, how you enter the world of your own vision is something that takes time and experience to
Well,
tap into.
the word was mindfulness, like you have to, I always tell people, you have to know, you have to understand what you saw. You have to understand what attracted your attention. You have to understand the dimension of it. I mean, I can look at this thing here, I could get all black, blah, 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 and your face is, okay, this is dramatic, this is the fun. How am I going to do that, But if you don't have that first, if you don't, you see something and your attention is caught by it, but you don't sense the elements. What happened? And what happened is nothing happened because you didn't work it. You didn't look at it and look at it. You didn't sit there and say, oh, this is cool. I like this. I like this kind of very kind of the high cheekbones and this and this and then the light coming down, dramatic, dark, bang, 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 boom, it's going to pop. And I gun for it. I gun for it. But if I just take the thing out and go click, it's spray and pray kind of thing, like bam, but there has to be some element of recognition of what you saw and why it's important to you.
I think that's important.
You need motivation.
The why. Yeah.
Yeah.
Why are you here, right? What is the intent behind it all? Why do people come to your masterclasses?
I've had some very interesting reasons, but
so there's usually a wide array of reasons why people want to come to Rio Helmi's.
You'd be surprised. You'd be
Okay.
surprised. I mean, I think people come. Yes, they feel attracted. They want to convey. They come because they want to convey what they're interested in and what they feel. They do. I mean, most of them do. But I work with people who barely know how to photograph, and sometimes they just knock me out. They really get something that's
really,
because they have, they understand that, they learn to understand principles that they're the ones taking, it's their idea, their vision, their thing. This is what I want. I mean, one of my latest, I don't know if you follow my Instagram, but if you look on there, there's this woman, Jasmila. She did a thing on a birthing in Bumi Sehat. If you run down Rio Helmi, not documentary Rio Helmi, and you should find it. And I put it together with an old friend of mine, Robin Lim from Bumi Sehat. And Robin's, it's okay, and this woman, she had such a nice way of, being. And this couple really took to her. She took a few shots. I mean, her first shots that she sent to me, I freaked out. I got on my bike and I went over to the clinic. It was like, Jazz, we got to talk, And she got it. She understood it. And then she worked the angles more. But the most important thing was that she got the trust of this couple who were giving birth.
Yeah.
And this woman just basically gave her carte blanche. I mean, there's some pictures in there that were just a little bit, Instagram would have gone, this does not conform with our community rules.
Sensitive content.
Like, this is life. Doesn't conform with our community rules. We'll take this. But but there were some powerful pictures in there. And I used some of them on Instagram, but she got an amazing portfolio thing. And now she wants to work on, she's working on, I don't know if you know, Bantar Gerbang. Bantar Gerbang is one of the biggest rubbish dumps in Asia. And she wants to do a thing on school there, and that's a much, much more different proposition, but she got the courage from doing this. And she also wanted to do that. And so she has this pulling her. And another person wanted to do portraits. She said she couldn't talk to people. She's too shy. She takes decent pictures, she's too shy. Came back the first day shooting, and she just put the camera down and said, I've never talked to so many people in my life. And she came back with some nice pictures. I mean, great stuff. So there's these things that happen that, because when you just go out and say, take pictures and say, oh, this is the f-stop, and it just becomes a technical exercise, and they don't really know what they're doing anymore. And that doesn't interest me.
No, not me.
And my wife has done a couple of my master classes, and she's doing a thing on holy water. And her last series of black and whites, there's a few of them that are just really very, very cool. You know, I mean, not saying it's just my wife, but they are cool. And so then there's this Hungarian woman who in Georgia who we did a remote mentorship, and she did an amazing series on the Holy Springs and the whole scene, the midnight meditations and the whole. And really, I mean, just so because she was really interested, and she said like after the third time she went, she decided she had to get in the water herself. It was like full immersion, literally. But some of the stuff is very so. That I like that. I like being the, what do you call it, like the doorway or whatever, helping people to get to that, because it's fascinating, that transformation when people transform and see that they can do something.
Must be fulfilling as well.
It's very fulfilling for me, actually. I didn't really start teaching until about maybe 5-10 years ago, and then very sporadically, and it's only since the pandemic I got much more into it. I teach other stuff, but I teach Buddhism, but I don't teach. I didn't teach photography until later. But this thing of people coming down to this thing that you're talking about, sometimes it's necessary because they have such an idea of, how to take a picture of how this, and then you kind of like, look, you got to break out of this, and this is why we do this thing about being comfortable with yourself and being knowing how to put yourself in a situation. Otherwise, it's just kind of, it's pillage,
How has your spirituality, how has Buddhism helped you be better in that respect, if at all? Or is it a journey that you took before?
Well, I think my teachers were hoping it would be better, but it's okay, slowly, step by step. Buddhism is a very practical, very logical, very honest look at life as yourself and consequences and so forth, and it's really based on a lot of things, at least 3 or 4 things which are very, very necessary. Cause and effect. Nothing happens without cause, and nothing really lasts until it changes. And what your motivation is a very big part of cause. So these things, they play a role in there, and it's just. Look, I started off as a photojournalist and as a photo documentarian, and it was a bit of a tough world. You had to really kind of push in there. But along the way, I ran into this whole thing, which really modulated. We had to really kind of look at what I was doing. My thing early on in the beginning of my career was remote tribes, and how these remote tribes would interface with the modern world that kept encroaching. And so my idea originally was how to give them some space so they could be heard and seen, and understood. And I had a very cool boss. My boss, my mentor, was a guy called Titus Katoko, and Titus was my chief editor. It was a newspaper called Sinar Harapan, which was the second biggest newspaper in Indonesia at the time, and he had created this tabloid magazine, it wasn't like weird tabloid, but it was tabloid format. But it was all about culture and stuff. It's very interesting, and we had some really cool people working there. And so he created this whole format that nobody had really thought about in Indonesia at the time. And he was a real outdoorsman and loved doing stuff, and he was also a very intrepid journalist. He'd covered 65. He'd done a lot of stuff. And he just gave me, said like, okay, he actually, what do you call it? He plucked me out of, what's the term again? He took me out of the Bali Post. I was working for there was an English language Bali Post, and I was editing that. And he came along and said, you could do better. And he gave me this job as associate editor, out of nowhere, associate editor of this magazine. And said, look, you just have to come to our meetings at least once or twice a month in Jakarta. Otherwise, you can write your own assignments. You can do whatever you want to do, and we'll underwrite them. What else could you ask for? So I spent a lot of time in Eastern Indonesia. So that was cool. So coming from that, where there was this, I would go on, in those days, you would disappear for 2 months. I'd come back and my kids wouldn't recognize me. So, I'd be out there chewing betel nut, whatever, coming back like, wow, these roads are really smooth. I remember getting into this car once from the airport, and I said to the guy, and I still was stuck with this Eastern Indonesian accent. I said, wait, licin sekali jalan. And the guy looked at me, he's like, oh, this is weird. So I called myself, and oh my God, these roads are so smooth. Now, after being like, in those days from the airport in Tambolaka in West Sumba to Waikabubak, which was only about maybe 50 kilometers, it would take like 10 hours in the Jeep. It was wild. And, half the places you had to walk to or ride a horse to. So, it was tough, and you had to be, tough. And there was a bunch of us who are now older. Some have gone, Indonesian photojournalists, photographers, quote unquote adventurers, who were working there. And, and so that was it was not like now, it was, so we came from that. And then, and you segue into a more modern situation. And it was like that all over the world. And another mentor of mine was a photographer called René Boury. I don't know if you know him. René Boury was Cartier-Bresson's kind of his protege until they fell out. So René just said to me one day, I think, God, it was in 1989, he said, Rio, our world is over, It's just like, you get all these guys with autofocus and this and this and that and this and that and this and that. And coming back to your question about Buddhism, it helped me, roll with stuff better, to understand that. And I had the most hilarious moment with, I swore I would never go digital. It's old school.
And?
So I guess it must have been the year 2000, the millennium. I was up in Ladakh in a place called Kegompa.
Ladakh being northern
India.
Yeah,
in Kegompa, and I was covering something there. And I was also there for a big teaching that His Holiness was giving. And, I was having an audience with him. And we sat down, and suddenly he looked at me and said, oh, wait. And he called to his attendant and said, I brought something for you from Dharamsala. And said, okay. And he gives me this little Fuji digital camera, So it's a terrible moment to like, does my guru just gave me a digital camera? What does this mean? And I'm like, okay. And I pull it out, and it's charged. So, okay. It was a little dinky, Fuji, one of the first early little things. Okay. It's, it must be, right? And I'd come with my friend and his mother, who was this crazy psychologist, one interesting lady. So she was a Jungian psychologist, and they had wanted to meet him, and so they came for part of the audience, and then, they were going to leave, and I was just going to talk to him. So I pulled this thing out, and I had my Contax G2 film camera with me, but I decided, this is, I'm so impulsive, and said, I'm going to take a picture with this Fuji thing. Sounds good. The menu is in Japanese. So I'm scrolling through it. I wiped all the pictures. They were so pissed off with me. His mother was like, and he was so pissed with me. but he got over. So that was my introduction to like full on digital.
We've all done it.
And that was really a sign of things to come. There was a steep climb going from, 20 years of, 30 years almost of analog.
So when was this? When did you
2000, the year 2000. I mean, it was about the time things started getting decent,
Yeah.
Yeah. So, that was a steep climb. That was, yeah. So, yeah, I was trapped. I couldn't really curse the thing because I don't know if I still have it. Let's put it somewhere.
And you were Buddhist at this time?
Yeah.
And so that allowed you to kind of adapt a little bit more freely?
I think most people would be surprised to hear that, yes, because, I mean, I don't think I'm the model. As a friend of mine said to me, he says, you have really good knowledge of Buddhism, but, your practice is
questionable.
That's lagging behind.
Does it infiltrate into any of your photography teachings, your master classes?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
there must
sure.
be some stuff that
Absolutely,
you pull in.
absolutely.
How do you teach then, going back to something you mentioned about one of your students? Let's say you want to do portraits, but you are shy of talking to other people. What is your process to teach them how to be more engaging?
It depends on the person. I think, you have to sort of read the person first, see where they're coming from, and then you can find a way in. But a very important thing is to have empathy, and empathy comes from understanding that actually that person sitting across from you or who's in front of your lens or whatever is really not that much different from you. There's some things that on the outside that look different, but basically the basic stuff is there. We have the same basic needs, we have the same basic problems in life, and we also, a lot of our problems, I mean, it depends on the person, but you need to kind of get people to understand that that's a fellow human being. And one of the things that's so important also is that, people like to think, they're independent, and when you break it down for them, they go on a wonk, because like, okay, I mean, this simple glass of water, let's look at the process. Where did it come from? The glass. Who brought it up here? This setup, did you do this all by yourself? Did you create the bricks? Did you create the cement? No, I mean, the amount of involvement of other living beings in our existence is insane. I mean, you look like a guy who does intermittent fasting. Maybe you only intermittent fasting. Maybe you only twice a day. But am I misreading this? I'm kidding.
Sometimes fast, but not longer than a couple of hours.
But okay, so you eat a minimum of 2 meals a day.
Yeah.
So I don't know what your diet is, but you have different ingredients in the food, and all those each one of those ingredients comes from somewhere, comes from somebody, goes through somebody else's hands. By the time it hits your table, the process that's gone through, how many people, how many living beings, if you eat meat, are involved?
Thousands.
But who's independent?
Yeah, no one.
So when we start, that works for some people. It works really well because it makes them kind of break out of their sense of isolation. Say, oh yeah, we are completely interconnected. We are completely, somehow or another, will always be interconnected, and that's important. You talked about the idea of photography of touching people and communicating, and this is where it starts. It's that recognition. I think you can't really talk about being, having empathy for people before you sense that they have similar needs as you do, and that the problems that you experience, other people experience as well. The joys, the ups and downs. So it's really important.
That's the essence of empathy, isn't it?
Well, yeah. And then once you have empathy, then you can start actually giving. Because, we don't want to develop pity. Compassion is not pity. Compassion is feeling with and understanding. And then loving kindness is to start to give back. And weirdly, weird as it might sound, but in photography, there is this process. There is this possibility of this process where you allow somebody to shine, or you allow somebody to, whatever. That's the highfalutin kind of aspect of it. The simple aspect is just respect. Yeah.
How do you tell a story through images, or at least what would be the elements that make up the skill of storytelling through photography? You do
case
these
by
photo
case.
essays.
I mean, if you just in general thing, I think, there's that simple formula, like EDFAT, like environment, detail, timing, angle, focus and stuff. But it's really about if you're telling a story, these stories, what's the context of the story? And then in that context, what's the interaction of your subject? And what are you revealing and what becomes revealed? So it really depends. I mean, some things, some stories work better than others, because sometimes you see people like, for example, with this, let's just take the rubbish dump, okay? It's easy to go in there and you can spend, I can do it. I do it sometimes. And just the whole picture's a dramatic picture, such a crazy dramatic scene. But are you really involved? Are you actually letting something be revealed? Are you letting something, are you showing what these people are going through? Yeah.
You mean more become integrated, if you can, or at least have an element of integration?
Well, you have to be in it.
Yeah.
To see it.
Which takes time, effort, research, work, language, all of that. Samurai. Yeah.
That takes time.
Yeah.
And it takes time to know the timing too. Because basically, the picture is done in like a couple of seconds, or in 1/15th to 1/25th or whatever it is of a second. But that whole process to get there.
Yeah, I always talk about the 1%ers. For actual taking the photograph is essentially the last 1% of an encounter.
But it's the build-up to that brings you to that point where that happens.
This is why there's an important question that actually was introduced to me a while ago by another photographer. What's more important, the encounter or the photograph? And I don't always think it's a question that dictates they're mutually exclusive, but when you think about that, when you actually think about, it comes back to this mindfulness and what your intent behind taking a photo or a set of photos is, and what story you're trying to tell. If you figure out the encounter and you figure out that story side of it that no one sees, that's behind the lens, that no one sees in an image, I believe that a lot of the time the image will reflect that, will come from the important encounter.
I mean, it's all that stuff you just said should happen before. When you're there, it's built in, it's integrated. It has to be integrated. And, when you blow it, it means you're not on it. I mean, I still blow it, after 40 years,
And that's okay. I think that's also something that we have.
It's not okay. It just is.
No, yeah, it just is. But it's
you like it or not.
Sorry, it's important to be okay with that as a truth, right? As artists, I think that's kind of an important trait to have, because then you always wanted to get better, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you have a standard.
Yeah.
And you have a standard, and sometimes those standards are realistic. Sometimes they're your demons. And it's always that.
Can you give me an example?
I just did a shoot on Saturday with two of my colleagues, Indonesian colleagues, Bewi Harta and Anggara Mahendra. They're both very good photographers. Bea's he's about in the 60s, I guess. And Anggara, I've been watching him, and he's really developed as Anggara Mahendra. And he's really, developing. He's developed. But it was this funny scene. We were there, and it was a big kind of event, and they had some Balinese priests in there, and there was this one shot where I don't know what I was doing with long lens, but I had it's long lens in my hand, and I was standing about that far away from this priest, and he starts to how they get dressed and the change, and he flicks out his cloth. And I just saw it, and I saw it billowing, and I just and it was funny because it reminded me of a picture that I'd done 4 years, about a month each year of reportage on the Dalai Lama's teachings with 20,000 people, and there was a team of us. And there was a Swiss photographer, Manuel Bauer, who did a book on his own, and he had this fabulous shot that he got of Lingam Shade, flicking his robe out. And I saw this thing unrolling, and I thought, I'm holding the fucking wrong lens. Excuse me. It's like, and I was like, and and okay, too late. You miss it and you roll it. And Angara at that moment cut in right in front of me. I mean, it happens. We were like, it's a tight scene. Cut in, and he got this shot of something else. And later we were at the Waro, and we said, yeah, geez, I really felt like kicking you today. And he said, why? I was just pissed off. I was grumpy. I missed a shot and you got a shot.
I hate that feeling.
Right in front of me, right in front of that whole scene.
Yeah.
And we just laughed and laughed. It was just so hilarious. But it was just this moment, and there's this beautiful kind of, for change, it wasn't just a white cloth. It was a cream colored, and it was semi embossed, and it had the right perfect weight, and the wind caught it, and it just rippled, There I was, this is stupid.
Yeah, looking like a lemon.
Exactly.
Put that just down to a moment. It's just a moment in your memory.
Like that. It was like that.
Yeah.
Because I was shooting something else, and I turned around, and there I was. Too late. And then Angara cut in. And the timing of the whole thing was insane. It was really funny. And then something else happened. This woman came in, and the priest was washing his feet. And this woman must have been his disciple. And she goes in and she just takes the water from his feet and she drinks it. And I'm like, okay, things happen they happen very fast. So when you kind of have that standard of being able to catch things as they roll and you miss them, it kind of, you have to get your rhythm back. You have to get back into it. You can't dwell on it, because it's like, it's gone.
Well, so then if people take photos, not cameras, good example of, the person being ready or spotting a moment, how do you see us moving forward in terms of the spirit of photography? How do you see photography evolving or devolving over the next 2, 5, 10, 20 years?
AI is seductive, but it's empty. It's no matter how good it gets. I mean, I look at a picture that's done with AI and I go, I don't feel it. I don't get the spirit. It's perfect. But it's like, looking at a woman who is truly beautiful from the inside and looking at a mannequin that's really well made. It's really like that for me, I look at some pictures that are done with AI and just kind of going like, oh, if I was in advertising, I could see that because it's a tool to sell things. It's a tool. But that tells you a lot about the work too. The fact that it's a tool for advertising. It's a marketing tool. It's it's selling something that isn't really there. Often it's like some sort of. Whereas when we're doing documentary photography, we're doing the exact opposite. We're trying to catch what's there, right? So it's going to be interesting. I can't predict how that's going to pan out, but I think, everything's cyclical, how we're all swinging back to the far right now, and then with this thing, and I think it might, I don't know. I hope.
What about what role does social media play in that? Because as photographers, we have one eye on the AI landscape, and then almost daily we have an eye on the social media arena and how we can propel ourselves forward as photographers, as artists, so that more people can see our work, or we can say more, or we can express more. Do you feel social media is a hindrance to that, or it's a danger? And we're looking at the next even 5, 10 years, and take AI aside, but how people connect with each other these days, how people express themselves authentically, if at all, right? Those essences of photography that we've been talking about, do you think it's going to be even harder for us to resonate with the younger generation, or be able to, maintain that authenticity through the lens?
I think it all comes down to why you use social media, how you use it, quite honestly, I relate to it as self-publication, self-publishing. And self-publishing is always a tricky thing. I mean, you need discipline for self-publishing. You have to know, and that's, that's also a challenge, But uh, I think, print. I mean, it's almost impossible now. I don't think I could do the assignments that I used to do, print assignments. First of all, nobody's paying any money for it, and second of all, I mean, nearly every major publication that I've worked for has just been downsized and downsized and downsized and downsized. It's all online, And it's annoying because I'm, like I said, I'm old school. I like broadsheet. I like opening the New York Times or whatever it is.
Yeah.
I mean, I like opening up Compass or whatever. It's interesting, but that's gone. That's gone. And as a person who contributed a lot to that media, you have to think, okay, do I continue or do I go something else? And quite honestly, I mean, can't remember who said it, but maybe it was Raghu Rai, or I can't remember. Raghu was always quoting other people anyway. But like photography is my religion, if you like. And it's something like that. But it's like it's that aspect of photography for me is the way I interact. With things that I see and things that I experience. Not the only way, but it is a very big way that I interact and share. So social media is my media now, in a way. Not my only media, I mean, of course, but it is very important in our lives. And unfortunately, it's also enslaving. You produce something that is of quality, and 2 days later, it's, it's not being viewed. It's like if you produce a book, the book is always there, and the book's on the shelf. I mean, I have hundreds of books, photographic books. Some I've done, some other friends have done. And it's there. You pull it out. I pull out Salgado or I pull out Raghu Rai, and it's like whole experience. And, it's a big thing,
Do you know Sebastião Salgado?
Yeah.
He's here in Bali?
I haven't. He hasn't been for. I've seen him for about a year here, but
Okay.
He has a house in Sunrow, but he's mainly in Paris.
Okay.
I think they're living here they're staying here less and less. I'm not sure.
To be able to
I haven't seen him for a while.
meet him.
He's quite a character.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Sebastião.
I've seen a lot of his.
Sebastião.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of his talks on stage and presentation stuff.
He's very charming.
Obviously, his work is fantastic. But yeah, but an interesting character to talk to.
Behind every great man, his wife.
Really?
Leia is amazing. I mean, she's a big part. I mean, she's a sweetheart, but I don't know. I've never really worked with her, but she's definitely, it's a team. He's the guy in front. It's a team.
Before we wrap up, I wanted to touch upon a few kind of value lessons we might be able to share. One is kind of the myths of photography. I think speaking to someone who's, I'll put this politely, more mature, who's been around the block. I mean, I think I'm mature. A lot of the time I speak to the younger people who have a completely different take and more, I guess, more present take on where photography sits in the world and where videography sits.
What year were you born?
82.
82.
40, just turned 40.
So it's, on the edge of the digital explosion.
When you're sitting with your teaching hat on, do you ever talk about misunderstandings of photography? I think we touched upon them a little bit, but there seemed to be just a maze of myths surrounding photography, certainly in the social media world. Is that great at you, or do you even notice those kind of things?
Give me an example.
Well, the technical side. I mean, I've just done a course on how equipment should not matter really at all when it comes to photography, but there is a myth out there that I need the latest this, and we're sold that, right? I'm not blaming the individuals.
That's still going on?
Oh yeah, it's the next camera, it's this, you need this accessory, you need this accessory.
I mean, sometimes I'm in the camera shop and I'm kind of lusting after this camera or lens, and and I'm thinking, I better. Well, next month I'll have the money for this or whatever, and some kid comes in and buys the whole shelf, and I'm like, "Oh, Daddy's rich,"
Yeah.
But I think to a certain extent, but I got some interesting lessons because I worked with some great photographers. I worked with Rene Buri, I worked with Brune Barbe, I worked with Raghu Rai, alongside them, and
before you go on, how did you get that kind of access?
well, that I just lucked out because in the 80s, I was living here, struggling doing photography. I was doing the stuff I was doing for Bali Post first, and then for Mutiara and stuff. So, and then this who became my publisher, this guy came up to me, a French guy, Didier, through a guy who became my business partner for a while, Leonard Lueras. And they said, hey, would you like to work with us? We want to put some, stuff together. And so Leonard was hot to do this book. Leonard was always full of puns. He called this book Bali High. It was an aerial book. Yeah, it's Bali High. Okay. So there we were. And we got, Leonard was this guy, he still is around, but he was such a character. I remember going into Tommy Suharto's conference room, for Qatari. Qatari was a helicopter company. And Leonard's wearing a bright Hawaiian shirt with a pinstripe jacket, like a suit jacket on top, and shades on. This is in the conference room. And this guy could sound. And I'm sitting there thinking, basically we're screwed. He's just walked into this, and they're all fascinated by him. Like they're just, and he sells this project, and we got like, I don't know, something crazy, like 100 helicopter hours. And in those days, an hour was $800. That's basic, after the high, the aviation fuel. And we got this gig, we did this book from Java right through to Bali. And later on, I did another one, but further. There's lots of stories there. But so I got on in this book, and so I was doing aerial photography all of a sudden, that I loved it. It was just it was cool.
Is that the same photo essay that's on your website?
There might be an old one there.
Okay.
Yeah, from that. But anyway, so then it progressed, and Didier was very keen to do another book, and it was called Bali Style. And by this time, I was such a snot. I said, oh, I don't want to take pictures of rich people's houses. I'm a documentarian. I'm a you have to do this, Rio. This is the book, So I did it. And then the next thing that unrolled from there were these books were like, we did 7 Days in the Kingdom, Thailand, with like 50 photographers from around the world. So I got into the circuit. So I interacted with all these people. And then we did, I was chief photographer for the Indonesia book, Voice of the Archipelago. And that's how I got to know Rene when he was coming. And then there was all the Magnum guys, Abbas and all those guys. So we retained our connection. So there was Abbas and a few, and we had this underground club called the ABC, the Asian Bad Boys Club. And it was like, Abbas insisted on being the president. And every 3 months, somebody would get fired, or
Oh, wow.
there'd be a coup. And Abbas it was just ridiculous stuff. But it was a friendship, a real friendship.
Yeah.
And then, there were people like Raghu Rai, who had met in 1984, 85 in India, both covering this huge event, Buddhist event. So it was, I somehow was lucky that way, So I had all this contact with all these people. Yeah.
And writing? Tell us a little bit about your writing. And
Oh, wow. That's the beast in the room, isn't it? Everybody's on my back. Do your memoirs. But I had a good tip from a good friend of mine who's a writing coach, Shelley Kensberg. She said, look, don't write a biography. Write memoirs, just things that you remember.
Okay.
Clips and pieces. So I'm going to try. I'm starting to do that now.
Well, we can give you some video memoirs of the last hour and a half or so. Couple of questions to end then.
Yeah.
Hopefully they'll lead into a conversational ending. I think for me anyway, we talk about photography and artistry being subjective, and art is the craft that is purely subjective in many people's opinions. But for me, there has to be a standard. There has to be a definition of good photography and not good photography, or good art or not good art. I mean, there is a technical aspect, but there's also a metaphorical and figurative and storytelling aspect that I think, in my opinion, can be judged to some level or another. First of all, do you agree with that? Second of all, what would be the difference between good and great? Two questions in one. Go.
Gotta tick it off. I think you can't ignore aesthetic, whatever your aesthetic is.
You cannot ignore it.
No, you can't. It's not to say that everybody's aesthetic has to be the same, but there's always an element of aesthetic. And what does aesthetic mean? Aesthetic, it means that there's an involvement of harmony, an involvement of contrast, and and so forth. If you just took a really bland picture like this, there was a movement there, the super, hyper, whatever, the realism or whatever. And I remember, having a conversation with a good friend of mine, Firman Iksan, who was in Jakarta at the Art Institute there, and we had this argument. They said, because he was teaching and he was, I think he was dean or whatever. And I said, this is just crap. Firman's crap. Rio, you're just so crusty and old. It's like, this is what they like, and this is what. Yeah, but there's no aesthetic there. I can understand, straight out documentary. I can stand, what's the guy Brody who does that kind of really rough, railroad stuff. But there's no aesthetic in this flat, neon lit. It's like. So I think.
But that's what they celebrate, right? They say
the
that
anti-aesthetic.
Yeah.
But I think there is an aesthetic to the anti-aesthetic.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
And people have been exploring that for years. And then there's the other thing is content. And I think content really does matter. It's the message, whatever's in there, and I think without it, it's just an experiment. It's just craft. There's a difference between craft in photography, craft and art in photography, or art can be in journalistic stuff. I mean, there's plenty of people who do very amazing journalistic work as well.
What's the future for Rio? What are you working on
I
at the
hope
moment?
there's still some left. I'm hit 70 now, and I'm thinking, what am I going to do now?
Are you 70?
Yeah,
like
I'm 70 years old. Yeah, but I have to hang around because my wife's 31. So anyway,
what?
Yeah, so I gotta hang in there for a little while.
She's 31.
Yeah.
That's insane.
It is insane. We kind of looked at each other and said, like, what are we doing?
Yeah, how long have you been married for?
We've been together for 4 years and married for 1.
Cool, good for you.
So it's interesting.
What's the next 2-5?
So maybe if I can get another 20 in, that would be good.
So memoirs, what are you working on?
I really want to do the memoirs.
Yeah.
I really want to, and I actually would like to have something done for my 70th birthday, which comes up in November.
Okay.
So I'd like to. That's one goal. I'd also like to republish my memoirs, my memories of the Sacred Book, which I don't know if you've seen that or not.
Seen it, yeah.
Because I'd like to make it smaller and small format.
A lot of your books large format. Right?
Yeah, it's too big. I mean, it's
grandiose. Yeah.
I always wanted to do a book like that. Like, what does it feel like to have a book that nobody can put in their suitcase? But it's like,
bookshelf.
Bookshelf. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
But I love looking at it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's still nice to look at. So I would like to do that. And I have another few projects that I'd like to do, book projects on Bali. That is still, they're cooking. Not necessarily all pretty subjects, but still. There's that. And I would like to write more. Yeah.
What is it about? Can you tell us something about you that no one else might know?
That's why they don't know.
Come on, give us something.
I don't know. I think I'm a pretty open book.
Pretty open book. Well, you've been very open with us today. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been an absolute
my pleasure.
privilege.
Thank you very much for having me here.
I know you're a huge inspiration to many people out there, including myself. So thank you so much. Who is do you still get inspired by people, in your circle or outside of your circle? Who do you look to kind of?
Look, I think, there's something about photography that a lot of people don't, and art as well, that a lot of people don't acknowledge. It's that this language that we have of photography, this lexicon of photography, it's not something which was set and then we all learn it. It's something we learn, develop, pass on. We're all inspired by other things. We all are. You know, there's nobody out there who's like just a genius on themselves. This is absolute bullshit. And the fact is that once you're in that, then at a certain point, it's your turn to give. It's your turn to mentor. It's your turn. And it's just the natural flow thing. We call that civilization, you know, and the photography is something which is such a powerful movement. I mean, you go back, well, Nietzsche, what was Nietzsche? 1811 or something like that?
1800s.
1820 or 1811. And the first successful prints, you know, I mean, this guy made a print and, you know, and look where we are now. Look where we are now. I mean, we're just like, we're just pumping out the stuff. But then there have been some amazing and remarkable stories and books and photo essays and photographs and done, you know, you're doing them, other people are doing them. So I really feel that I'm just trying to cover up the fact that I forgot the original question.
Your inspirations.
My inspiration.
We have not been drinking.
But yeah, I think, I mean, Henri Cartier-Bresson would be one of them. Absolutely. Kind of classic. But I am old school. Definitely, René Bourri. To some extent, also Raghu Rai. These are people who inspired me. And, you know, when I say inspired, their work is inspiring. Sometimes some people don't like them, you know, but that's, you know, you don't always like the person who you know.
Yep.
I happen to have met them, so I had some connection with them. But, and in Indonesia, one person who I always feel inspired by is, there's people like Oscar Motulo, who ran the Antara Museum, and he has mentored so many young Indonesian photojournalists. You should look him up. And Don Hasman, who used to be my colleague. Don Hasman is now, he's about 10 years older than me. He's still mountain climbing. This dude is like, he's about 5'2", and he's like no fat at all, and he's got lovely character. He's always like, we used to call him.
He sounds insufferable.
No, he was great. He's great. He's really great. I found him insufferable at first, because we used to call him the angel in the office. But then I realized that he really was a good guy. And you know, his photography, it's okay, but he has such a spirit of adventure and you know, keep on going. And he just this year or last year, I think it was, just turned over all his slides to the National Archives.
Wow.
I mean, that's big heart. That's a big heart, you know, incredible. And he's just, and he's still like, you know, he travels by Gojek or goes to, you know, and the guy's amazing.
I think it's important to understand that your inspirations don't have to be within, I mean, they're photographers, but they don't have to be photographers, right? You can be inspired by.
Oh, I have a lot of people. If you ask me in general, know, I mean, His Holiness the Dalai Lama for sure. My teachers, some of the other teachers that I have that you probably never heard of, I mean, they're amazing, absolutely amazing, and inspiring to me as a human, you know, as a human being. And yeah, there's a lot of people. Yeah.
Well, this conversation has been inspiring. Thank you so much.
Oh, I'm glad.
I hope the audience will take as much from it as what I did. So once again, thank you so much, and hopefully see you again back here one day.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
It's fun.
Cheers.